So thank you, the organizers, and to invite me for presenting during this Clinical Trial Nexus Europe Digital Conference. These are the type of conference we are attending during the COVID-19 pandemic mostly, because obviously there are no face-to-face meetings to take place until we pass this pandemic safely. So the topic of my speech is patient enrollment and retention in clinical studies. I have a case report where I worked, contributed to the development of this program called DL-Day. It was a large phase 3 program in fibromyalgia. So the question is what challenges we would have faced today to conduct a clinical program of such a size, and I will explain why, during this period of time with COVID-19 pandemic. I have no conflict of interest. I'm a medical doctor. My specialty is diabetes and endocrinology. I've worked over 25 years so far in the industry, also biotechnology environment. I've experience also in clinical practice as emergency doctor and also officer of the Italian Navy. So let's move to the topic. So the clinical development plan is always plays a key part in the development programs of potentially effective and well-tolerated drugs for treating diseases. So who works in clinical development is fully aware of the complexity of designing, drawing a clinical development plan and designing innovative and appropriate and regulatory driven, and nowadays much more and more patient focused clinical studies. We often interface with regulatory agencies for including in our study protocols the regulatory endpoints, without obviously forgetting the quality of life endpoints, which are very much close to patients and also to regulators. And there are also an important portion of endpoints which more and more are largely represented nowadays and will become even more in future, which are very much linked to patients. And the drugs that we try to develop obviously might have multiple effects. So we do look at primary endpoints and secondary endpoints and put often exploratory endpoints at earlier stage of clinical development. In pain, for instance, we do not look only at pain reduction per se, but we look also at pain-associated symptoms. For example, if there is any anxiolytic efficacy of the drug, or the drug has an impact on sleep quality, for instance. This program I worked in the recent past was on fibromyalgia. It was a large phase 3 program. Fibromyalgia is a clinical condition which is characterized by chronic musculoskeletal and soft tissue pain with tenderness and associated with many symptoms in addition to pain, which are pain associated, which debilitate profoundly the life of these patients with associated sleep problems, fatigue, depression, and anxiety. So pain play a key role, but as you see in fibromyalgia, there are many other factors also contributing significantly to impact on the life of people suffering from fibromyalgia. Fibromyalgia is not an easy disease to diagnose. It's often diagnosed by exclusion of several criteria. There are criteria in place from 1990 from the American College of Rheumatologists. They were revised in 2010, 2011. The disease per se is complicated by a not very well-known physiopathology. The clinical symptoms are very much characterized by allodynia and hyperalgesia. So pain is very amplified. So these patients suffer from loss of pain control mostly. And to make the disease even more complicated, there are subgroups of patients with fibromyalgia which are characterized by different pain thresholds. So people who tolerate pain better than others, some that do not tolerate the pain whatsoever, and they are called high catastrophizers. And these patients in particular, those who really struggle the most with fibromyalgia because they are highly depressed or suffer from anxiety and have very little control over pain. There are obviously other clusters of patients. The opposite one of the high catastrophizers is people who can tolerate pain quite well, so they have high control over pain, so they do not tend to catastrophize and they do not tend to suffer from depression, anxiety, but they do have high tenderness, and there is a cluster in between these two. What is important in fibromyalgia is to understand exactly what patients report in terms of their symptoms. So this doesn't change even during the pandemic or any other adversity during the course of our clinical studies. And it's important, regardless any adversity that we might face, like today for COVID-19, that we keep close to patients and we capture the feedback and do listen to them and do understand exactly what they are telling us in terms of the symptoms they do suffer. In this particular condition, as I was saying, pain is not the only one, even though it's a generalized pain, so it's not just the localized pain. He has some stigmata of neuropathic pain, but he also has some nociceptive pain. It can be peripheral, but it's also central because, as I shown you earlier, the people do lose control over pain because central mechanisms are involved in the pain pathways. They do suffer extensively from fatigue and sleep disturbance, so they don't sleep at night. They have fibro so cognitive impairment. They do often suffer from depression and anxiety, and most of these patients actually, instead of being diagnosed for fibromyalgia, tend to be diagnosed at start as depressed or anxious, but they do have also other conditions, as you can see here. And this was all these symptoms were captured during a fibromyalgia public meeting that was arranged by the FDA in 2014. It's the only one I found in the website, so I have to assume that there was nothing after that, at least published. But it was important because all these symptoms were collected in a public document, and you see, and they were very well characterized in terms of their importance from patient perspective in public. And it was, and the voice of patient is the report made in October 2014, released by the FDA, is publicly available. I also personally had the experience of working with several patient associations. As I said today, and even more than before, particularly during this pandemic, when trials still continue, is to keep close to patient groups and patient associations, even closer if we can, because we can learn so much. In this particular case, I had the fortune to attend a meeting at the House of Commons and with some fibromyalgia patients, meeting with some politicians and learning directly from their voice about their symptoms. Often, describing fibromyalgia as an invisible disease, often misdiagnosed as a mental issue, or the fact that people with fibromyalgia very tend to have low control over pain management, and the drug available worldwide are very few, none in Europe, officially approved for fibromyalgia. Most common, they are treated with antidepressant, and 50% rate, 49% of patients rate the overall treatment is poor for treating fibromyalgia. Their lives is significantly impacted, but also the life of families, friends, and employers. Because we have to consider that all ages are affected, but this is a disease of the middle age in particular. Apologies, sorry. Okay, so it's also important to say that patient report that the research is minimal, so there are not many programs ongoing. Diagnosis is challenging, it's done by exclusion criteria mostly, and it's a big impact on quality of life for patients. 79% of patients said that it was basically they are in constant pain, and many said the pain is severe. And that was a feedback I got directly from patients during attending this meeting in London. So if we look into our interactions with regulatory agencies, we can say that in this particular clinic case of fibromyalgia, the agencies really don't have so far released any specific guidance. So which obviously creates an additional element of challenge for those clinical developers who want to or try to develop new medicines for treating fibromyalgia. And we have seen from patients' feedback how important that would be if somebody could come up with a better treatments in future. And the agency in Europe basically has stated, and this is actually the guidelines for medicinal products still valid in Europe, says that fibromyalgia has an unknown etiology, the pathophysiology is not well characterized, there are established criteria for diagnosing fibromyalgia, but not everybody, but very few I would say you use them, apply to them, and the reality is fibromyalgia is, even though if it's highly prevalent, remains underreported. The agency recognized the importance of pain and other domains in addition to pains, like functional activity, which is important, and there is a need of improving functionality in patients because these people are middle-aged, mostly around their 50s, and they have to obviously go to work and they have to continue with their own life and all the daily activities. So the agency recognizes how important is maintenance of efficacy. Is an element I will pick up talking about retention of patient clinical studies, so trying to show that new drugs will be able not only to improve on pain in the short period of time, but also pain will be improved over time. And they also acknowledge some regional differences which are not well specified, but this is the reason why they want also people representing the continent, so not just studies located in one particular region. So it's a full data package, but there's no official guidance in place. And I showed you from that public document from the FDA that there's not clarity much also from the FDA in regard of fibromyalgia, and there's no specific guidance that can help developers for the clinical development programs for new drugs. So this is the all-day program I'm referring to in this particular speech, and I want to bring this, and I'll do some connections also, thinking about what could have happened if I had to run a program of this size during this pandemic. So the all-day, so-called, was a large phase 3 program with 3 identical 13 3-week treatment studies. One study each study had 1,200 patients, so there were 3 studies run in parallel, in total around 3,600 patients, study lasting for 18 weeks, including screening and follow-up, with 15 visits. One was a telephone contact. Additionally, there was a 4th long-term open-label 52-week safety study of approximately 2,000 patients, 500 approximately of which were totally new, whilst the other 1,500 came from the 3 efficacy study. And this was the full package of this clinical development plan. And this safety study, by the way, had 21 visits. So, the new molecule tested at the time was called mirogabalin in the area of gabapentinoids. This was the 3 studies were identical, as I said. They had 3 arms each, 2 arms of mirogabalin, 2 different dosing. 1 arm was placebo, and 1 was the active comparator, so pregabalin. And this is where the assessment in this program that were agreed with the agencies, with both the FDA and the EMEA. You see the complexity of the program yourself based on the number of efficacy assessments that were tested and the safety assessment with 2 bodies in place. One was an hepatic adjudication committee and one was a data safety monitoring board. So talking about recruitment and retention, we had a strategy in place, and part of this strategy was, of course, to reach out to patient groups, patient association with fibromyalgia. So we did, but starting from Europe and then also in the US and elsewhere. It was a global program. So working with our CRO closely to advocacy groups and establishing or consolidating relationship to raise awareness about the disease, raise awareness about the clinical program. It was a good way to also incentive promote the existence of this clinical program, and the strategy was well in place. And I would say today, I would imagine this would still apply during the pandemic, reaching out, obviously using and benefiting from digital technology, with as much as possible with these associations and groups. So all countries utilize. We had the study, the old program had was highly technological. We used the ePro system, so we had devices for capturing through all the questionnaires. Most of the utilized, there were so many questionnaires in this program to capture and detect and measure all those efficacy assessments that I showed you in my previous slides, and that was good because digital technology, particularly in pain area, is highly supportive because maximize data capturing and minimize the one issue always present in the past of missing data. So I would say during this pandemic, this technology would be still very highly welcome because patients could monitor, themselves, let's say, through the device they were given, alongside also the device that the site had, all the sites had during the study. And we are talking about over 400 sites in a program of over 4,000 patients. So in order to, when the program was completed in 2017, I had left the company at that point due to restructuring reasons. So I left at the end of one of the 3 efficacy study was completed. But obviously, I continued working and being in contact with my ex-colleagues, and I actually took part in the analysis of the results and the publication and preparation of the manuscript and publication of the manuscript, which came in July 2019. Before that, I worked also in a campaign that I thought was appropriate to promote, which was trying to push on the regulators on thinking globally, harmonizing and creating a new guidance, really to help clinical developers in the attempt of developing new medicines for this condition. This came, in fact, a few months before the publication of the primary results, which were published in July by Professor Leslie Arno, who was the coordinator for the US sites. And Professor Allen is a top key opinion leader in fibromyalgia, psychiatrist working in Cincinnati. She has taken part in all the major clinical programs of existing fibromyalgia, approved and not approved drugs. So all the strategy put in place was successful in terms of how the program was set up, how the interaction were worked out with, particularly with the patients. There was a bit of a struggle with the regulators, as I showed, but we had good interaction with the investigators and the sites. We had several investigator meetings. So we really, and they were face-to-face. We also had some web-based training, and which obviously would be more and more prominent nowadays during COVID. But all this reflected a very high with a very high impact on completion rate, because across all the 3 efficacy study we had a completion rate between 70 to 80% across the all groups. I'm not going to read these numbers to you. These are the discontinuation rates, so you can see the other way around. But we have optimal completion rate of the subjects for the study ABC, so the 3 efficacy studies, which was an excellent result. And also in the placebo arm, which is quite interesting to see, the placebo arms of all 3 studies the discontinuation was comparable. We had mostly 80%. Or slightly less of retention. So that tells really how much willing these people had to participate in clinical studies and in the hope of high expectations of better treatments. This was the safety study of 2,000 subjects, slightly beyond 2,000. Mostly were rolling over from the 3 efficacy study. And overall, the safety profile, tolerability profile of this new compound was good, comparable to the active treatment, the comparative active treatment of pregabalin. So no safety issues emerging through this large program. And the use I mentioned already of the ePro systems utilizing this program were also very important, and obviously particularly in times like today of COVID-19 or any other, in any case, either without any adversity, I would say, particularly in pain area, I would highly encourage the use of these systems. Obviously, it's important also to say that the 3 efficacy studies did not meet the primary endpoint. So placebo had a fantastic response in these people. As you can see here, this is the curve of placebo. It was higher than everybody expected. So, and for that reason, even though in the 2 active investigational drug arms, the placebo response were improved, but obviously it didn't separate as expected from placebo, where also the placebo response improved, and this obviously obviously signed basically the decision of not progressing further, but just withdrawing the indication of fibromyalgia for this investigational drug. We acknowledge the patients in the primary manuscript because obviously the involvement, the participation, and the retention of the patients around just slightly below 80% was a fantastic result. Then I wanted to go a little bit further than that, so I took the freedom to analyze the results, the primary result, published results a few months earlier. The same journal, the editor of the same journal agreed, was keen on me to also elaborate further and look at the lessons learned from that trials, and that program, and I spelled all this down in this paper, which is publicly published, and I thought to say that was a good service for the community. Just going beyond, just the simple the analysis of the results. as I just presented to you, just looking at why the results were negative at the end. I wanted to spell this out and the major lessons learned from that experience. Certainly, the experience of working closely to patients was highly valuable, something to continue if possible, and to repeat or replicate. Surely many colleagues do in many other therapeutic areas. To raise awareness of the diseases, and particularly those very complex, but also the rare ones, those ones where there is a patient focus and input is so highly important and valuable, like in most of our clinical development programs, taking into account also the regulatory challenges as I have presented to you. So invaluable experience in terms of working with the patient groups, and I've been continuing doing so, even though I'm no longer working in at the moment in fibromyalgia programs, but in our job, with flexible and open pipelines, we don't know if that will happen again. But anyway, it was a privilege to learn from the patients, to work with patient groups, and that wouldn't change a single thing even during the pandemic, because digital technology would allow us to continue doing so. So basically, in this last slide, I would like that to say and basically to answer the question from the title of my speech. So what we would have changed in that, which are the lessons that we learned, we are learning because it's still unfolding during the pandemic, how we would have run, or how developers could run a program of this size, it's so complex, with so many endpoints and assessment, as I presented, a number of visits and complexity per se. So the ALDAI program could have been easily put on hold due to its complexity if it had to be conducted during the pandemic. But obviously there could have been some counteraction to take. So obviously the number of sites was very high, was 150 sites per each of the 3 studies. So I'm talking about 500 sites here in total. The intensity of the visit, the number of procedures. So one thing that would have been, I would imagine, necessary perhaps to revisit the old sample size of the program and see if there was a space during the pandemic, if this was the case, to run maybe a smaller program, maybe with less power, maybe, or even less treatment arms, something to consider. But obviously, it has to be, these kind of considerations need to be tailored on a case-by-case scenario. Obviously, one challenge was would have been to seek and obtain, so do amendments of the protocol in case, for instance, of reducing number of visits, and obviously seeking for regulatory new approval from regulatory authorities, EC and IMBs, and that obviously would have implied a readjustment of timelines. Now, this readjustment of timelines give us the opportunity, and I think the pandemic has made us thinking about this, how maybe in future we might need to put more realistic timelines in our clinical programs. Often we do get very stretched timelines, and sometimes they turn to be not realistic. So it's an opportunity to think more about maybe calibrating or reconsidering timelines in our clinical programs. So number 3 is obviously restarting the program. So thinking about more a decentralized approach. So that will become necessary. So this to reduce the burden on patients and also on their families. Do not forget, people have to go to the site, so they often are not able to do by themselves. They have to be accompanied by family members. And then also the burden of staff, study site operators. So the reducing number of visits and procedures are potentially has a beneficial effect on also our sites. And the ePro devices that were already in place in ALDAI, so I think that should be really incentivized particularly for those programs where patient-reported outcomes are key. Telemedicine, medical consultation for sure. So this program had an assessment at each single visit of the Columbia scale to assess this suicidality risk. And this is also because the pregabalin was in there, was a gabapentin. I was in that class, so even though the drug didn't have any signal in that sense from early phases. This was a phase 3 program. So, but anyway, it was mandated by the agencies to look at that. So, very, specialized but careful, visits, specialist visits still very much apply during the pandemic. Through telemedicine, yes, for sure, but being obviously cautious that they have to remain, done by specialists, particularly when it comes to, potential CNS side effects such as, risk of suicidality. Other things we've been talking about, during these conferences is, study drug delivery. Yeah, that could be something that would definitely, reduce the burden. Local labs, nowadays we tend to centralize all the labs, but during a pandemic of this relevance, that would certainly would be an issue. So because it would obviously require the patients to move and go to the sites for drug delivery and lab assessment. So some of the lessons that we are all learning during this pandemic is that we need to be more flexible, really, more adaptable, but still there is no compromise in terms of data integrity and patient safety. That's for sure. So choosing up more adequate, manageable study programs. So we should think about that. And this is an opportunity to reflect on sample size, on study feasibility, how we can decentralize more study activities, number of visits and procedure. And I was mentioning about the digital technology should be fully utilized. So making sure that study position and frequency of study visits become feasible, taking into consideration patients and families, and then can turn into a more cost-effective equation for patients and also for study staff and operators. So, can we lose or anyway considering of loosening our relationship with key stakeholders? Never. So actually trying to make them stronger, even in periods of crisis like this. So, and using digital technology, so interacting even more with patient groups, patient associations, and also impacting and pushing on agencies to help out wherever we do have situations like in fibromyalgia, as no guidance is in place and different outcomes with, for instance, 3 drugs approved in the US and none in Europe, and 2 in Canada and 2 in Japan. So it's not the different assessment and outcomes. This is no longer possible in any way. Also for in particular for patient perspective, also for clinical developers. So higher flexibility and adaptation is key. Modifying clinical development plans and strategies and risk-based monitoring plans. Simplify, modify, counteracting to any challenge. And this is a great example, COVID-19, that we also are all learning from. So, but as a last point of my speech is no compromise in terms of maintaining high study quality, data integrity, preserving patient safety. So we can't really accommodate this. This is a must. We have to continue and even further improve wherever is possible, because these are a hot topic and is a must. Is actually at the heart of what we do in clinical development. And if necessary, be prepared to postpone, reactivate clinical studies, and when based on revised risk-benefit assessment, even cancel programs must not be seen as something that is not to contemplate. So anyway, thank you for your attention, and look forward to the next panel discussion. So actually we will continue talking about this topic in how which strategy we would should be adopted to mitigate the risk of enrolling and retain patients. And COVID-19 is a great example. It's giving us all, high thinking and counteractions in this regard.